There are certain artifacts that resist cataloging, objects whose existence feels less like a discovery and more like a warning that has simply chosen a new shape. The reels from Larchmont are one such case. They arrived unceremoniously in a gray municipal crate marked for disposal, part of a county records purge that took place after the closure of the Larchmont Historical Society. Inside were 4 16mm film canisters, each wrapped in brittle parchment labels. The handwriting had almost dissolved under the weight of decades, but one name remained legible across the cracked adhesive. Larchmont Theatre, 1956 to 1959. The reels were accompanied by a folded letter written on municipal stationery, dated 1973. It was unsigned. The message was short, typed on a mechanical ribbon that had run dry halfway through its sentence. Do not project. The frames do not hold. I've learned not to dismiss such notes. Within Vault 13's archive, every fragment of cellulose and magnetic tape tells the same story. People trying to capture something the world wasn't meant to replay. When we first inspected the Larchmont canisters, their lids had fused shut with corrosion, the interiors lined with white crystalline growth. Vinegar syndrome in its final terminal stage. The air that escaped smelled like sour acetate and mildew, sharp enough to sting the eyes. Yet despite their condition, the reels were complete. No splices missing, no cuts. Each one precisely 1,200 feet in length, though oddly light, as if the film base itself had thinned or hollowed with age. The Larchmont Theatre, according to regional directories, operated from 1947 until its closure in 1962. It was a modest, single-screen venue, red brick, a hand-painted marquee, the sort of place that screened matinees for children and travelogues for the local civic club. There's no surviving record of its demolition, only a blank plot of asphalt where the address once stood. It was standard procedure to digitize any surviving footage before chemical breakdown became irreversible. The technician assigned to the task filed a brief preliminary report before his transfer. A few lines that became the spine of this entry. Projection tests reveal inconsistent runtime. Physical reel length remains constant, yet playback duration expands with each run. Recommend full stop and containment. Pending further review. Playback duration expands. Film does not do that. I've reviewed the restoration logs, the technician's notes, and what remains of the digitized transfers. What follows is an assembled account, drawn from his recordings, fragments of municipal correspondence, and the surviving footage recovered before the containment order was issued. I advise discretion. Time behaves poorly in these records, and the film itself seems to remember what it once saw. The Archivist, Vault 13. The Larchmont Reels first appeared in the inventory of the County Historical Preservation Office, almost by accident. The file that mentions them is routine, a storage intake form, typed in fading ink, dated August 14th, 1987. 4 metal canisters were listed, each unmarked except for a penciled letter, A through D, and a brittle strip of paper glued to one lid. Larchmont Theatre, 1956 to 1959. Nothing else distinguished them from the other reels of forgotten civic footage the county was discarding that summer. They should have gone straight to the landfill with the rest of the unclaimed film stock, but a technician named Marjorie Halpern noticed a pattern on the canisters, faint concentric discolorations on the metal, as though something inside had been pressing outward. She recorded a note on the form that read simply, "Possible chemical expansion, strong acetic odor, store under fume hood." That note, buried in the paperwork, saved the reels from destruction. 2 months later, the Historical Society was dissolved. The building was emptied, its records boxed and forgotten in the courthouse basement. The Larchmont canisters sat there for almost a decade until Vault 13 received them in a bulk transfer of unsorted county property. By then, the labels had curled away and the lids had fused shut with rust. When the crate arrived at the vault, it carried no special markings, just a faint smell of old acetate and mildew that clung to the air. The initial inspection log describes moderate corrosion, no visible leaks, and then adds a line that stands out in retrospect: internal rattling, inconsistent with spool tension. Source: undetermined. The reels were assigned to Harold Kemp, one of our restoration specialists. Kemp was methodical. He had already handled fire-damaged newsreels and nitrate stock recovered from floods. But the Larchmont case unsettled him almost immediately. His handwriting in the early entries is precise and steady, the way archivists write when they believe the material will behave. His first assessment reads, Reel A, Kodak safety film, 16 millimeters, edge code 1956, length approximately 1,200 feet, shrinkage moderate but projectable, smell acetic, condition salvageable. Remarks: image density excellent despite age. Emulsion glints irregularly under lamplight. Possible crystallization. The phrase "glints irregularly" appears 3 more times in his subsequent pages. It would become the first hint that what was captured on those frames was not entirely fixed in place. Kemp began cleaning the reels under low light, frame by frame. He described typical decay, brittle sprockets, fine powder from decomposing acetate. But when he examined the first few feet through a loop, he saw something that made him pause. The image was clear. The lobby of a small mid-century theater, a ticket booth, and 3 children entering beneath a hanging banner reading "Community Matinee." Yet when he advanced a single frame, the hands on the clock behind the booth shifted backward. He noted the discrepancy as a printing error. After a full day of preparation, he loaded the reel into the vault's telecine scanner for digitization. The process was standard. The film passed through a cold light gate, 1 frame at a time, its image captured onto a digital reel with precise duration markers. By length and speed, the runtime should have been 32 minutes and 47 seconds. The captured file was 38 minutes, and 12 seconds long. He measured the reel again, unchanged. No extra footage, no added loops. The file, however, contained sequences not visible in the physical film when inspected afterward. In his report, Kemp wrote, "Frames replicate. Lobby sequence extends beyond physical length. Digital timing unstable but internally consistent. Clock within scene progresses non-linearly." He assumed at first that the scanner had duplicated frames during capture, but subsequent calibration showed no error. The reel itself was creating time where there was none. To understand the magnitude of this anomaly, imagine watching a film that continues past the end of its spool, where projection becomes an act of addition, not playback. Kemp described each new transfer as heavier with minutes. His second attempt yielded 41 minutes, the third 45. Each time, the physical reel length remained constant. The footage itself seemed ordinary enough, a sequence of the theater's interior, patrons entering and exiting, a smiling manager shaking hands. But small changes emerged between captures. A poster on the wall changed titles. A man who had stood behind the ticket booth in one version was absent in the next. The shadows lengthened differently each time, as if the angle of the sun in the footage was following another day entirely. Kemp sent an internal memo requesting peer review. It never reached its recipient. When I reviewed the surviving digital transfers decades later, the differences between them were subtle but cumulative. Watching them in order was like watching time stutter. The lobby seemed to breathe, shadows contracting and expanding at a rhythm unconnected to frame rate. The patrons' movements looped, slightly slower with each iteration. At 34 minutes into the last transfer, the camera, which had previously panned toward the concession stand, hesitated. The image paused for a fraction of a second, then drifted upward toward the projection booth window. Behind the glass, faint light flickered, and for one frame, the reflection revealed not the theater, but another room entirely. Brick walls, shelves, and a workstation. It was the vault's restoration lab. Kemp never mentioned this frame in his logs. He may not have seen it. The flicker was quick enough to escape notice. But it was there, embedded in the digital version of a film made decades before our facility existed. That single frame altered the entire interpretation of the reels. If authentic, it suggested that the footage was not only lengthening in time, but synchronizing with its viewers, creating reflections of its observers within itself. The last coherent entry in Kemp's log is undated. The ink pressure varies, as though written in dim light. Each viewing alters frame order. No evidence of editing. Image seems aware of observation. Stop capture until further notice. He left his workstation that evening and did not return. His resignation letter arrived by mail 3 weeks later, 4 sentences written on lined paper. The final line read, "I think the reels want to be seen." After Kemp's departure, the Larchmont materials were sealed under temporary restriction. They remained untouched for months, catalogued only as unresolved temporal anomaly. During this period, the vault attempted to contact anyone associated with the original theater. Most records had been lost in the county archives, but one brittle newspaper clipping survived in a regional microfilm roll. It was dated August 17th, 1959, and described a small-town renovation project. Larchmont Theatre to install modern projection system. Owner Arnold. Fitch announces plan to update equipment for longer reel capacity. Below the headline was a black and white photograph of the lobby. The camera angle matched the one in Kemp's footage precisely. The same tiled floor, the same clock above the booth. But there was one crucial difference. The banner in the image read, "Grand Reopening, July 1956. The date did not match the article. The photograph printed 3 years too early. The projection logbook found with the reels provided the final piece of context. It was water-warped, but legible. The handwriting belonged to the theater's projectionist, a man named Leonard Ashe. The early pages record routine notes, lamp replacements, film rentals, temperature readings. But as the entries progress into the late 1950s, his tone shifts. August 4th, 1957. Audience complaints of reels running long, film length unchanged. Possible miscalibration of sprocket tension. September 12th, 1958. Midnight show extended itself. Same reel lasted nearly an hour. Arnold wants to send the print back. I think we should leave it alone. November the 3rd, 1959. The booth clock disagrees with the house clock. My watch matches neither. Projection ends after audience leaves. Screen glows on its own. Those were his last written words. No closure followed. County demolition reports list the theater as removed year unknown. City zoning maps skip directly from parcel number 181 to 183, omitting the lot entirely. When the Larchmont Reels entered Vault 13's custody, the theater itself no longer existed. Only the images remained, and those images, with every attempt at preservation, insisted on extending their own lifespan. They were no longer content to record time. They were beginning to manufacture it. The Larchmont Reels remained sealed for nearly 6 months after Kemp's departure. Their presence in storage was described in internal reports as ambiently unstable, a phrase that has no technical definition but conveys the quiet discomfort the staff felt whenever they passed the cabinet that held them. Temperature readings fluctuated by fractions of a degree. Humidity rose and fell without correlation to climate control, and several nearby clocks lost synchronization. It was as though the reels were exerting a small gravitational pull on the instruments of time around them. In early 1997, the vault appointed a new restoration technician, Elaine Porter, to audit all dormant anomalies. She was younger than Kemp, precise but skeptical, trained in the methods of digital preservation that were only just beginning to replace analog inspection. Where Kemp had approached the reels with caution bordering on superstition, Porter treated them as a technical problem to be solved. Her first journal entry on the case reads, "Film instability exaggerated." I suspect the supposed temporal variation results from early telecine error. We'll perform a non-projective scan to eliminate mechanical artifacts. Kemp's notes verge on metaphysical. That sentence, verge on metaphysical, is underlined twice. She intended to bring the Larchmont materials back within the comfort of measurable science. Her decision to proceed set the next chain of events in motion. Frame Analysis Report. Porter, January 1997. Method: cold LED scan, no projection, isolated feed. Film stock, Reel A. Predicted duration, 32 minutes, 47 seconds. Output file length, 33 minutes, 12 seconds. Her first transfer differed from Kemp's by less than half a minute. Porter noted that discrepancy as statistical noise and prepared a second scan the following day. The second transfer extended to 36 minutes, 19 seconds. Her tone in the report changed. Minor extension recurred, frame density stable, extra footage identical to prior sequence except for shifted lighting. Clock behind ticket booth shows reverse progression for first 20 seconds of addition. Lens flare pattern inconsistent with equipment. She wrote that there must have been latent exposure due to previous projection, but she also added, "I can't explain why the image looks brighter now." The film should be darkening with each pass. The third scan took place 3 days later, this time using a new calibration lens. Duration, 41 minutes, 5 seconds. The imagery now included scenes of the theater interior that had not appeared in any previous version. The lobby was empty except for a single chair positioned at the center of the frame, facing the projection booth. At first, Porter thought the chair was a prop, a detail she had missed. But when she compared the footage to earlier captures, the chair simply wasn't there. It had been introduced by the film itself. She wrote, "The reel is developing content through exposure. Light seems to feed it. I will reduce lumens for next test." Her following note, written in smaller script, added, "Frame numbering inconsistent. Some digits reversed. Frame 218 printed as 812. Possibly reflection." That was the first mention of reversed numerals, a recurring feature of the Larchmont anomaly. It suggested that the film was not merely replaying, but rewriting its own chronology. A month later, Porter was granted limited clearance to examine Reel B. Unlike Reel A, this canister carried no exterior label, only a deep scratch in the metal forming a diagonal line across its lid. The inspection notes described the stock as denser than standard acetate, light reactive at low exposure. Porter unspooled a few feet under a lamp and observed faint shifts in tint, as though the emulsion contained overlapping layers of image. Her report states, 2 frames occupy the same physical space. When viewed under magnification, they alternate. Each layer depicts different occupants within the same location. She ran a cold scan, frame by frame. Run time, 43 minutes, 18 seconds. The imagery displayed the theater's auditorium from the projectionist's perspective. an angle unseen in the earlier footage. Empty rows of seats glowed faintly in reflected light. Porter marked several anomalies. The projected image within the scene appeared brighter than the light source should allow. Each seat seemed occupied when viewed indirectly, but vacant when paused. The final frames contained overexposure patterns shaped like silhouettes. She annotated, "Possible double print of audience used for compositing." The era's cameras lacked this precision, but maybe a local artist experimented. Despite her rational explanations, she began to limit her viewing sessions to daylight hours. Colleagues noted she avoided the lower corridors after dusk. The last transfer attributed to Porter occurred on February 12, 1997. The record shows she entered the vault at 6:47 p.m. and remained until after midnight. She was alone. Her resulting file extended to nearly 58 minutes, longer than the physical capacity of any 16mm reel. In the new sequence, the camera climbed the narrow staircase toward the projection booth. Through the booth window, the auditorium below was visible again, but this time the projector's light was gone. Instead, the screen itself glowed from within, as if the image source had moved to the other side of the glass. The booth door stood open, and the light spilling out of it did not match the pattern of the frame. It was constant, white, without flicker. At 34 minutes into the file, Porter's reflection appeared faintly on the glass barrier, separating her from the scanner. She did not notice. She wrote in her notes afterward, "During scan, reflection observed within film, possibly captured the inspection area. Slight delay between my movement and reflected image. Unsure whether digital lag or exposure ghost." This statement is the first clear evidence that the reels had begun to record their viewers. Each inspection added a new layer of observation. Film watching observer, observer reflected into film, until the two blurred. The vault closed access to the collection after that session. Porter's reports grew sparse, then ceased. When a supervisor visited her workspace 2 weeks later, the equipment was powered down, the reels sealed, the lights off. Her computer displayed a paused image, the Larchmont lobby, empty except for a chair facing the camera. She had annotated the still frame with a single line typed into the file name. There was never anyone in the booth. Over the next year, the vault recorded intermittent activity from the containment chamber. Nothing dramatic, only irregular data readings. Clocks looping through identical timestamps, duration fields extending beyond normal limits. A 48-hour log recorded continuous operation of a projector that was no longer connected to power. The staff concluded the sensors were malfunctioning and eventually disconnected them. But one final digital capture survived, stored on an isolated drive. It appears to be a composite of the earlier reels, spliced without human input. The file length is 1 hour, 14 minutes, and 36 seconds. The first half is recognizable, the theater's interior, unchanged. At the midpoint, the imagery begins to fold inward, frames repeating, reversing, collapsing into each other. Then, at 52 minutes, a single new sequence appears. The camera, or whatever controlled it, drifts toward the booth window and looks outward into a different room, a space filled with shelves, stacks of canisters, and a lightless corridor receding into distance. On one shelf, 4 metal reels sit in a line. A small label on each reads 0041L ARREEL. The footage ends at that moment. The timestamp in the corner of the digital file is identical to the time recorded on the vault's server log for the viewing session that produced it. The film had recorded the act of its own observation in real time. Internal policy required an immediate containment review. All subsequent references to the reels classify them as temporal echo media. The working theory proposed that the film's emulsion, degraded and chemically unstable, somehow reacted to exposure by encoding not only images but temporal information, allowing new moments to imprint themselves within the old. Each viewing acted as a kind of recording session, folding the present into the past. But no equipment could replicate the effect under controlled conditions. The process functioned only with these particular reels, as if the chemical decay itself were conscious of being observed. Attempts to digitize small fragments under microscopic light yielded nothing but blank frames until the operator looked directly into the scanner lens. Then the film displayed faint outlines of their reflection within the captured image. It was concluded that the Larchmont Reels did not record events. They required them. Elaine Porter resigned from Vault 13 2 months later. Her resignation letter is brief and impersonal, but in the margin of the final page she added one note in her own handwriting. Every time we tried to preserve them, we became part of the preservation. After her departure, no further direct study of the Larchmont Reels was authorized. The canisters were sealed in a lead-lined container, and access was limited to archival observation only. Still, over the following weeks, the facility's internal clocks continued to show irregular drift, seconds looping back, digital files growing in length even when closed. In one report, a technician described finding her daily log entries extended with extra sentences she had not written, documenting events that had not yet occurred. Each extension ended mid-thought, as though waiting to be completed. The phenomenon ceased only when the reels were transferred to a deeper containment level, far below any operating station. Years later, when the vault reclassified its archive, I reviewed the sealed file myself. The data logs confirmed the timeline. 4 physical reels discovered, catalogued, scanned, and then expanding beyond their own duration until the containment order. But a 5th reel, labeled E, appeared in the inventory after the seal date. No one admitted creating it. The canister metal was newer, uncorroded, its label embossed rather than written by hand. It was placed beside the originals as though it had always been part of the collection. The registry notes only a single line under its description: length undetermined. Playback not advised. The Larchmont Reels had become more than documentation. They had become an environment. Time, once recorded, no longer returned to its source. It spread outward, duplicating itself through each act of observation. What Kemp and Porter had called extension was not an error in projection. It was the film's natural behavior, continuing the show long after the world outside had forgotten there was a theater at all. Vault 13 retained the sealed container of the Larchmont Reels for more than a decade. They were filed as inert historical anomaly, a classification used when the object in question appeared dormant but remained conceptually unresolved. It was believed at the time that sealing the film away would end its influence. The records suggest otherwise. The first sign came from our digital infrastructure. Shortly after the reels were moved into deep storage, internal clocks began displaying brief reversals. A server would register a negative timestamp, then correct itself. These were assumed to be software bugs until one of the data managers noticed that the moments of reversal occurred exactly 24 seconds apart, precisely the rate at which a film camera records frames the vault's systems in effect were flickering. When the phenomenon spread to analog equipment, wristwatches, wall clocks, mechanical timers, it became clear that the effect was not isolated to the servers. It was environmental. Time inside the containment level was attempting to synchronize with the last recorded playback of the Larchmont Reels. In 2008, the Vault commissioned a controlled study. The purpose was to determine whether sealed film could continue to alter duration without direct exposure. The sealed case was placed inside a lead-lined observation chamber with its own internal clock. The clock was synchronized with an identical one outside. The plan was simple: compare them after 1 week. At the end of the trial, the internal clock displayed 7 days and 32 minutes, though only 7 days had passed. 32 additional minutes, precisely the original runtime of Reel A, had been generated within the sealed chamber. The film had not been viewed, yet it had continued to extend. Subsequent containment reports document more of these anomalies. Digital files elsewhere in the archive lengthened imperceptibly, with new metadata entries identical to the timestamps from the Larchmont recordings. Old broadcast reels began exhibiting overlapping frame counts. Even personnel schedules became unreliable. Multiple entries appeared for the same hour, each slightly different. It was as if the vault itself had begun recording. This effect was subtle but cumulative. Each day gained an invisible fraction of additional time, a quiet expansion that passed unnoticed except by those responsible for measuring it. After months of accumulation, these fractions amounted to minutes, then hours. By the time the anomaly was contained, the vault's internal calendar was 4 days ahead of the surface world. Those missing days never existed outside these walls. The research team attempted to calculate the rate of expansion. Their conclusion was paradoxical. The more attention given to the reels, the faster time within the vault. Distorted observations seemed to feed it. So, by directive, all study ceased. The reels were left untouched in their case, sealed under vacuum and darkness. But the problem with any archive is that it remembers too well. Years later, during a routine cataloging update, A junior archivist accessed the Larchmont file to confirm its storage location. The action took seconds. No visual exposure, no physical handling. Yet afterward, the archive's data system added a fifth digital entry to the collection. The file name read Reel E. No one had entered it manually. The attached metadata claimed a creation date of August 17, 1959, the same date as the newspaper article about the theater's renovation. Inside the file was a single still image. The Larchmont Theatre at night, its doors closed, its sign unlit. Beneath the sign, a faint reflection appeared on the glass doors, rows of shelves, metallic cases, a dim overhead light. It was the vault. The image contained its own observer. At that point, I was assigned as the primary custodian for the Larchmont materials. The reels had been officially reclassified as temporal contaminants. My task was to determine whether any fragment of them could be preserved safely without continuing the expansion effect. I did not project or scan them. I opened the file records, read the notes, and observed the anomalies through secondary data alone. Yet even through those layers of removal, the sense of drift persisted. I began to notice small discontinuities in my own documentation. Paragraphs repeated with slight variation. Sentences I had not written appeared between others, describing events from the next day. At first, I assumed fatigue, but the pattern was consistent. Each entry contained more time than I remembered spending writing it. The distortion was no longer confined to machines or film. It had entered memory. To understand what the Larchmont Reels had become, I returned to the original inspection notes and read them in order, as if following the sequence of a film. The entries began with fixed points, date, time, material descriptions, and slowly lost those anchors. By the final pages, Kemp and Porter had stopped recording measurements altogether. Their language turned inward, focused not on what the reels showed, but on what the act of viewing did to them. Kemp wrote, "The film shows the theater showing the film." Porter wrote, "We become part of the preservation." Different words, same revelation. The Larchmont Reels had never been simple recordings. They were mechanisms built by accident or design to capture the passage of observation itself. Every frame was a moment of attention preserved, multiplied, and reinserted into time. When the light of projection passed through them, it did not reveal the past. It restructured the present to include its viewer. The reels did not store time. They produced it. Further analysis of the surviving digital transfers supports this interpretation. Each frame contains microscopic shifts in pixel density corresponding to the rhythm of human heartbeats, an impossibility yet measurable. It suggests that biological perception itself imprinted upon the film. In a sense, the reels became an ecosystem, feeding on awareness. When people speak of hauntings, they imagine spirits clinging to a place or an object. But what if the reverse were true? What if places learned to remember and memories required matter to survive? The Larchmont Theatre may have discovered that truth accidentally when its last projection ran longer than it should have. The light kept moving even after the film should have ended. That excess of time became self-sustaining, folding back on itself until every subsequent viewing contributed to its growth. The vault did not contain the anomaly, it adopted it. This is evident in the final test conducted before permanent lockdown. A replica of the reels was created, chemical composition identical, image content absent. When exposed to controlled light, nothing occurred. But when placed beside the originals, even in darkness, the replica's emulsion began to silver, developing faint imprints of the same imagery. After 72 hours, the new film displayed a partial sequence of the theater interior. The reels were teaching the blank film how to remember. The effect extended beyond materials. Personnel assigned to the case began to dream of the same environment: the narrow lobby, the red seats, the empty screen waiting for light. Some reported waking with the impression that they had been watching something for a long time, though they could not recall what it was. Their watches would read times inconsistent with the duration of their sleep. All of them described the same lingering thought, that they had seen the projection booth open from the inside. I no longer interpret these accounts as hallucination. They are evidence of exposure through memory. The Larchmont Reels function as a closed circuit of attention: film, viewer, recollection, and retelling, all sustaining the same moment across generations. Every attempt to describe them replays a fraction of that loop. And so the temporal distortion is not an accident. It is the mechanism by which the reels continue to exist. Every observer becomes part of their runtime. That is the revelation. In a conventional archive, decay is the enemy. We battle it with climate control and digital transfer, believing that preservation protects truth. But the Larchmont case proved that some artifacts decay forward, not backward. Their deterioration is creation. Each layer of loss becomes another version, another minute, another frame in an infinite sequence. If one could step inside the final version of the reels, I believe they would not find the Larchmont Theatre as it was. They would find every room where the reels have ever been viewed, each layered atop the next, a corridor of projection booths stretching endlessly backward. And somewhere among those layers, perhaps near the center, a single image remains constant: a chair facing the light, waiting for someone to sit. We have learned that silence and darkness are the only true containment. But even those are uncertain. The reels were born from light, and light finds its way through any boundary. To this day, no one has reopened the container. The vault's internal clocks still gain or lose a few seconds each month, a minor irregularity officially attributed to magnetic interference. I know better. I have seen the pattern of those fluctuations. They occur 24 times per second, precisely the rhythm of film. The projection continues, even here, unseen. The show never ended in 1959. It only paused, waiting for the next custodian to check the time and notice that the day has grown slightly longer than it should be. The Larchmont Reels remain sealed in Sub-Level 9. Their case is stored within a vacuum chamber surrounded by lead, glass, and silence. No one has entered that corridor in years. Even the lighting system there operates on an independent timer, programmed to remain dark for 23 hours of every day, bright only for the single hour required by maintenance law. I have not requested an extension of that allowance. Light is the Reels' language, and every minute we illuminate them is another line added to their story. The most recent inspection showed no physical change. The canisters have not corroded further. The emulsion remains intact. Yet, the catalog time code assigned to the file lengthens each year by a fraction of a second. No one edits the record. The duration simply grows. It is a small shift, imperceptible to most, but I have come to recognize that slow accumulation as the heartbeat of the artifact itself. The Larchmont Reels continue to record, even in darkness. They do not need eyes or projectors. They have learned the shape of attention. All that remains is the possibility of being remembered, and that, I fear, is enough. From time to time, I still review the written reports, though I avoid opening the visual files. I no longer trust that they remain inert. Certain words within them behave strangely. Frame, light, real. Each time I read them, their spacing alters slightly, as though the text adjusts itself to accommodate the rhythm of a projector. It may be coincidence, or it may be that the Reels now exist wherever their language is repeated. That would mean this record, my voice describing them, the shape of these sentences, is another vessel, a new exposure, another frame in their impossible lengthening. If so, containment is an illusion. We are all running at different speeds within the same reel. There is a phrase written on the vault's containment ledger beside the file name. It was added years ago by an unknown hand, perhaps by Kemp or Porter before their resignations. The ink has faded to gray, but the words remain legible. The show does not end. I used to think it was a warning. Now I believe it was an observation. Every artifact in this place carries a remnant of its own beginning, a moment when it was first seen, first recorded, first known. The Larchmont Reels only made that truth visible. They revealed what the archive has always been, a structure built to keep time standing still, even as the world outside continues to move. The Reels are not haunted. They are faithful. They continue the act they were made for. And so, even now, behind those sealed walls, the projector of light without power may still run. Not visible, not measurable, only certain in its rhythm. 24 frames each second, an unending loop of a theater that no longer exists. If there is meaning in preservation, it may be this, that some records refuse to remain past tense. They insist on replaying the moment of discovery again and again until the viewer understands that they are part of it. Perhaps that is what the Larchmont Reels wanted all along. Not audience, not acclaim, just continuation. For now, the case will remain closed. The vault's clocks will continue their subtle drift, and somewhere in the dark between seconds, the old light of Larchmont will pass once more through the air, seeking another surface to rest upon. The Archivist, Vault 13.